In this video, you're going to hear some of the top career lessons from 3 data experts with pretty different backgrounds. It's a great discussion. They'll share their best advice for you to help grow your career, some pitfalls that they think you should all have on your radar to avoid, and they'll share some pretty interesting and sometimes funny anecdotes from their own careers that will really help drive the point home. If you're looking to get your first data job or grow and accelerate an existing data career, this is a really good session. It was a lot of fun. Check it out and let us know what you think in the comments, and hopefully you can apply this advice to your own career. Here is our amazing panel. We've got 3 Maven Analytics instructors. I get the pleasure to work with these folks all the time, and you're really in for a treat. So we've got Chris, Aaron, and Alice. Alice, maybe we can start with you. Think back to the early career. Were there any sort of like major pivotal moments or things that like once you realized and got your head around, or a skill you picked up or something that really helped you accelerate your career? Think of those like important inflection points if you were to graph your career, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I would say early on, I come from, again, an engineering background, so I was always very technical. And I remember within the first year or two of my time in consulting, one time I had to give a presentation to the executives, and I put a lot of technical things into that presentation, and I worked really hard on it for a few days. And then I showed it to my manager, and she redid the entire presentation. And at the time, I was very offended because I put a lot of effort into it, and I thought I did a good job. But then once I delivered that presentation that basically scraped all the technical things and just had the main takeaways, it landed really well. And it was just really surprising to me because I think for most of my like high school and college life, the focus was on technical things, and that's kind of what I prided myself on. But then I realized, like in a workplace, that's not the most important thing. And that really changed my career, because after that, I started teaching, I started focusing on data visualization, things like that. And I think combined, like that communication piece combined with the technical piece is really hard to find. And if you can do both, you can be a really great analyst or data scientist.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And it's also one that's, I would say, very common, right? Like all of us, when we're starting out, it's like technical skills, technical skills, technical skills. You think it's so important. And maybe because that's the hurdle we're trying to clear. But then you realize, like, these aren't valuable if I can't tell people what they need to do, if I can't actually get them to take action. So yeah, fantastic one, Alice. Aaron, let's go to you. How about any early pivotal moments for you? Any kind of wisdom you'd share?
Yeah, so kind of in that same vein, this was a non-technical skill realization that wasn't delivered in like a soft, like kid glove kind of way, right? So I was an analyst, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to work on a project where we were vetting different business intelligence vendors for one of our companies. And so I got to go through like the whole RFP process and working through the information gathering and the vetting process and balancing that with the business requirements from our client. And it was a super cool project. And I remember that I had a meeting with my executive stakeholder, and 30 minutes into the meeting, he stopped me. He goes, "Awesome. You finally told me what I wanted to hear." And it was like a very like, tough way to get that feedback. But it was like my first experience with somebody where it was a point blank, like, you need to communicate with different people within an organization differently, right? As an executive stakeholder, they wanted to hear the recommendation and then ask questions about the process or considerations or other things that needed to be investigated. It wasn't like I was talking to a fellow analyst that they were like, "Oh yeah, tell me the nitty gritty behind, these numbers or the detail," or something like that. So I think that was one of the first times, and it has honestly stuck with me, for my entire career since then. That was one of those lessons where it was like, you really got to understand the audience that you're communicating to and how they want to receive that data.
Yeah, and Aaron, I think you got a little laugh out of the other 3 of us here, because I think we're all thinking like, "Yep, I remember doing exactly that same thing." So again, like super, super common. Learning to read your audience and give them what they actually need is and not just trying to blow them away with with your your skills in every single thing that you've done. So that's awesome. Chris, how about you? Any major inflections or learnings?
Yeah, a whole bunch of them, including very similar stories to the ones that Alice and Aaron both shared. Mine was, to Aaron's point, I was on a call with a very tough client who worked for a big auto manufacturer in the US. And I was really psyched to deliver this analysis because it was really like technically complex. It was something I was super proud of. And Aaron, just like you said, I got very, very blunt feedback that was really offensive at the time, but in hindsight, I really needed. She cut me off mid-sentence and just said, "Get to the point," which is like, I remember it clear as day. I'm on like a conference call as this young analyst, and it was so jarring that it was very tough to recover from that. But the point she was making, which is a really good one, like you said, Aaron, is that like, no one cares how you did the work or what tools and techniques you use to get there. They care about the business impact, the so what. So I think just that realization that you really have to learn how to understand your stakeholders and think like a business owner before you think like an analyst. Like that was a huge aha moment for me as well.
That's awesome. And again, okay, so we had 3 answers for like one of the biggest pivotal moments in your career. And no one said it was when I learned Excel or Power BI or Python. It was about like the interpersonal skills, the business skills, communication, amazing stuff there. I love it. Let's actually, let me just pass on to you guys some of the things that are going in the chat. So we've got tons of folks who are transitioning. We've got transitioning from teacher, from chef. I think that's probably the most fun one. I might try to go the other way someday. We'll see. We've got folks who are already in career and just trying to have better skills. So we've got people kind of all over the place, which is great. We've got people just shouting amazing praise here for some of our panelists. Alice, we've got Dahlia here, says you continuously inspire me with your unique techniques for transforming ordinary stories into captivating ones, all while wearing a smile. Definitely agree with that. So thank you guys for letting us know where you're at and encouraging us here. Alice, let's go to you for the next question. Again, probably early on in your career, what's some of the best advice you ever received from someone else that's helped you in your career?
I would say for advice, well, there's a lot of things that one of them would be that I would say to focus on your strengths instead of trying to be like other people. Because when I first started, again, I just came from a lot of technical people. And so for a long time, I tried to be very technical as well. I tried to learn all the latest tools and read research papers. And I know people love those things, but I did not. And it took me a while to figure out what I actually like doing and what I was good at, and then focus on that. So for a long time, every time someone else was reading something technical and then I wasn't, I felt like I was behind and I felt like I needed to catch up. But then I realized if that's not what my main strength is, like I don't need to pour so much effort in that. And then I should really embrace what I'm good at, which I realized is teaching. And so then I just move forward with that. So I would say for those starting out, you don't have to try to do what everybody else is doing because there's so many tools out there that you can learn and you just can't learn everything. And so really focus on things that spark joy for you and then go into that.
I love it. Agree wholeheartedly. Aaron, how about you? Any good early career advice?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The first one's quick and it kind of ties back into the previous question where it's like practice focusing on solving the problem, right? And focusing on the why behind the problem. Tools are just a means to help you solve that problem. So whether you're learning a new tool or have to because it's what an organization or company uses, that's great. But focus on problem solving and the why behind the problem is really where like your skills as a data professional, an analyst, whatever the role you're in, that's really where the key ultimately lies. I think the other one that's really interesting is the whole concept of like done is better than perfect. right? So I know that as a young analyst, and still, like, this is something that I have to be conscious of, that tendency of wanting to make something, air quotes, perfect. It's a very different equation, to think of, to approach something looking at it as like there's nothing left to do, versus can I confidently go present this report, my recommendations, whatever it is, the findings, to impact this business question or problem, and stand behind that with confidence, right? So getting to that point where you realize, like, hey, the analysis, the recommendation isn't going to change. The rest is just minor incremental improvements or changes to, a report or something like that.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's a great one. Chris, how about you? Best advice?
Actually, a very similar answer to Alice's, which is that sometimes it's okay to specialize, right? It's okay to play into your strengths. It's okay to ignore the 99 other tools and technologies that are out there that other people are using. And specialization in Excel specifically served me really, really well, especially in my early career, because first up, I was thrown into the deep end in my first job, and I had to inherit these really complicated Excel reports that were quite sophisticated. And coming into that role, like everyone out there, I would have said I'm an 8 or a 9 out of 10 in Excel. And as soon as I got exposure to this work that, the senior analyst on staff had been doing, I realized I was actually like a 3 or a 4, which is a pretty common story. And by being thrown in the deep end, it forced me to really accelerate my skill set and understand just how capable and powerful this seemingly simple spreadsheet tool can be. And I leaned really heavily on that, and I built a reputation around my Excel expertise, and that opened up a lot of career doors for me, including opportunities to teach Excel skills, which paved the way for Maven Analytics, years down the road. So don't be afraid to specialize. Don't be afraid to play to your strengths. And it's okay to ignore some of the other tools and technologies around you.
Awesome. Yeah, really good advice there. I'll throw in some because I think it's useful. I got smacked pretty brutally by a manager at one point, just telling me, "Hey, you are way too slow." And it wasn't like a competency thing. It was I was obsessing over the little nitty gritty things in the detail, exploring every caveat. And, her point was like, look, all these little tiny things you're rabbit holing into, they're not going to change what we do in the business. Right. So like, I think her advice was, there's a trade-off between perfection and speed, and kind of similar to something Aaron said earlier, like you kind of have to figure out where you want to be on that for the specific task, right? There's no one right answer for everything, but my advice would be kind of be conscious of that. I'm curious to hear. We'll do the things you got right and some things you wish you had a do-over on. But let's start with things you got right. Aaron, what were some of the biggest things you got right throughout your career?
So I think one of the things that I got right was taking advantage of opportunities, and never really saying no to projects. So I think this was especially true early on. A great example is that, the BI tool kind of selection process. That was a huge project. I was over my head at points, right? It was uncomfortable, but the amount of learning and growth that happened during that, it ultimately helped get me promoted from an analyst to a senior analyst role. So like there was a lot that happened because of that, a lot of learning and a lot of growth. And that's kind of like my second point as well, is don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone, right? Because that's really where, the growth happens. So, a lot of folks will say this, but it's like getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It's honestly where you're going to see the most amount of growth.
Yeah, that's great advice. Chris, how about you? What were some of the things you got right?
Aaron, you completely stole my answer.
Yes.
It's like we rehearsed this. I was going to say the same thing. It's saying yes to scary opportunities and stepping out of the comfort zone, especially I think early in your career, saying yes is really important. Later in your career, saying no is really important. And it's important to make that distinction. But early in my analytical career, one of the scary opportunities that came to me was the opportunity to teach incoming analyst classes, Excel and VBA. And I had never taught before. I hated public speaking. I wanted to say no with every ounce of my being, but deep down, I knew that this was an opportunity that I shouldn't pass up, and it was going to be a growth opportunity and potentially open some doors, right, and give me exposure to different people in the organization, to different senior leaders. And what I learned was a couple things. Like, one, teaching was my flow state. Like, I ended up loving it, especially teaching technical topics where it's this art of breaking down complicated things in ways that a 10-year-old could understand, right? And seeing the light bulbs go off in the room, like, that was unbelievably motivating for me. And it sparked this passion that I didn't know that I had. And the second thing I learned is that I think there's this saying, it's like, teaching is like learning twice or something like that. And I think the spirit of that is, if you can teach something, it really forces you to understand the topic at a very deep level. And by teaching topics, courses that I've taught through Maven, I've learned so much more than I ever would otherwise. And it all came back to saying yes to that initial opportunity. And that was a pretty pivotal turning point in my career.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. Alice, how about you? What are some of the things you got right?
Yeah, I would say it is that struggle piece as well, but mine is a little bit different. I would say my main thing was putting myself out there, which was really scary early on in my career. But a lot of the job opportunities I've gotten have been from putting myself out there. So one example is I wrote a blog post about The Bachelor because I was really into that TV show 10 years ago. And then that got somebody who was on a podcast talked about it. And then somebody heard the podcast and then they offered me a job. So that was one example. Awesome. I've also put a LinkedIn post out there and then got a client that way. I've just getting this job. I used to work with Chris Brule, and that's how I found out about Maven. So just I tend to be scared to put myself out there, but once I tried, then I found that it worked. I just continue to do so, even though it still feels uncomfortable to this day. But I think it's really important to put yourself out in the world so people know what you can do and what you want to do, and then things will come from that.
Yeah, totally agree. And we've seen so many examples of our students who, same thing, felt uncomfortable, eventually put themselves out there, and it ended up being the best thing they ever did, and so you gotta get over that hurdle. Aaron, how about you? What are some of the things you got right?
So I feel like we had kind of talked about.
You started on this one. Yeah, sorry. Let's move on to wrong. Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the things, again, like, this is like a hindsight thing, right? You kind of don't know what you don't know in the moment. I think one of the things that I have tended to do is stick around in roles or companies for too long. Not Maven, obviously, no. But there's the last kind of career or job that I was in before I transitioned into analytics. I was probably there 18 months to 2 years too long, right? And I was comfortable. It was familiar. The thought of making a big change, was a little bit daunting. So there ended up being some other catalysts, to help kind of push me to make that change, which again was fine. And then the marketing agency that I was at, Chris and I were there together. I think that was a little bit, kind of too long as well. But again, it was that same kind of like, hey, this is comfortable. It's familiar, working with a lot of great people and stuff here. But I think that taking some of my own kind of thoughts or advice here, it's like, if you're in a similar situation where you've got that thought where it's like, I'd love to find something new, or like, this just doesn't feel quite right, but you're kind of sticking around because it is easy or familiar, or you have, other kind of close personal working relationships with people, like, really get good at analyzing like what's really important there. And oftentimes making the choice to move on from something can, be super beneficial or rewarding.
Yeah, I'd echo that in my own career a few times.
Yeah.
Alice, how about you? What are some do-overs you wish you'd had?
So, Aaron, I was going to say a very similar thing because it's exactly the same. When I look back, I just think about certain places I stayed too long, and sometimes I was comfortable. Sometimes I just felt like this is all I know. Like nobody will hire me with the current knowledge I have, and I felt like I could have taken action sooner. And I also feel that with technical skills. Like I think about all the times I wanted to learn something new and I just kept learning and learning and learning. And then I was too scared to actually take action and do a project on my own. And I think a lot of it just came from my insecurity. And I just think I didn't have the skills. But I think everyone, once you learn and you just try applying it, even if it's not perfect the first time, when you apply it, you will get those skills and you'll get a little better. And the same with when you're stuck in your career. If you just make a little movement, go network, or just do something little, you're going to get a little closer to your goal. So yeah, I think my biggest mistake was inaction, but then I eventually figured it out, and now I'm quicker to move on things.
Awesome. Chris, your career was perfect, right? Like no do-overs, no eraser needed on the pencil, right?
No mistakes. It was just clean slate the whole way. No, it's funny. Like I talked about specialization as a strength, right? And something that I did well in hindsight, going really deep in Excel and kind of building a brand around that. But you have to realize like that is a double-edged sword and you have to be careful. And I actually experienced some of the downsides of specialization too, which is when you go too deep down that road, it's easy to treat that tool, in my case, Excel, like a hammer, and everything you see around you is a nail, right? It's like, how can I use Excel to solve this problem, When realistically, some of these projects, could be solved much, much more effectively and efficiently using other tools, like whether it's SQL or Python or SAS or whatever it might be. And so I think it's important to specialize, but what we talk about is kind of this T-shaped skill set, right? Where you have a pretty broad range of foundational skills and real depth in one or two areas. And that will help you at least acknowledge like when a different tool might be appropriate for the job so that you're not, working with total blinders on and being so specialized that it's actually detrimental. So I had a couple experiences where I built some like wild projects using hundreds of lines of VBA when in hindsight, like probably do it with a Python plugin and like 5 lines of code. So just being aware of that, like, and not going too deep down the specialist path, I think is important to keep in mind.
Yeah, really smart, really smart. All right, so one last question for everybody, and we'll say you can't offer any advice that you've already given. So it'll make it kind of hard because you've already given some amazing advice. So if we take the things that you've said off the table, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a brand new analyst, either about to break in or just starting their first career, first job in data? Chris, let's put you on the hot seat and go first.
Yes. Over-index on soft skills. I think soft skills matter probably way more than you think. And I think this is true for most young analysts, is that everyone's talking about tools. All the conversation is around technical skills. Like that's the sexy stuff, right? It's the stuff you can show off and build and put in your portfolio. But it doesn't matter how technically proficient you are if you don't have communication skills, if you don't have strategic thinking skills, if you don't learn about the business and what makes it tick, and if you can't be a great teammate and collaborator. Like I will hire someone who over-indexes on those skills and has mediocre technical skills every day of the week, because technical skills can be learned. A lot of those soft skills are much harder to develop, but they're so critical to be successful in the data world.
Yeah, it's a great one. Alice, how about you? What's your best advice?
My best advice would be to not compare yourself with others, because I think we talked about this in little places all throughout, but to summarize it, there's just so much to learn out there. And I think I spent a lot of my career comparing myself to others, not feeling technical enough, not feeling I got experience at the largest companies. Within data science, one thing that people always, within data science, you learn a lot of algorithms, and then people always talk about what they're able to implement at their companies. And I would feel jealous, like, oh, I didn't get to implement that, like, I don't know how that works in practice. And people talk about that often. And then the tools are constantly changing, and you're like, oh, I haven't had a chance to use that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Everyone's on their own journey. And I always say, just compare yourself with who you were a month ago. Do you know more? Have you changed in some way that's good for you? And that's really all that matters at the end. So I always like to quote Taylor Swift, "We all have crowns," because basically you shouldn't compare yourself with others. You are good on your own path. And that's why we're all here, just to learn and grow.
That's awesome. And you stole my Taylor Swift quote, so now I have to do something else. Great answer, Alice. Aaron, round us out. What's your best advice to a newbie?
So I was originally going to say something similar to Alice, where it's the whole concept of like, be yourself, right? So I think the other one that we haven't explicitly talked about, but is kind of inherent, with any sort of role, is just continue, like, stay curious, right? Embrace that kind of continuous learning mindset. We really haven't, specifically talked about that, in this discussion so far, but the way that the field and, just the data landscape in general is evolving, it's happening so quickly and so rapidly. It's only going to benefit you throughout your career, or any, changes or developments to that you want to make. So staying up to date on current tools and trends and techniques is kind of paramount to being successful long-term.
Yeah, it's awesome. Awesome. So amazing advice here. Let's flip it around and we'll go to the audience here. So we'll jump into the questions tab. Hey there, hope you're enjoying the video. Sorry to interrupt. We'll get you right back to it. Right now, Maven Analytics is offering a deal that was just too big not to share it with you. We've got an early Black Friday sale, and you can save up to 50% off of Maven Analytics paid plans. So if you've been considering learning Excel, SQL, Power BI, Python, Tableau, and everything else that you need to become a data analyst or accelerate your career, now is the perfect time. Check it out at mavenanalytics.io. You can see the Black Friday offer in the banner at the top of the screen. You can't miss it. Again, if you're on the fence, there's never been a better time. We don't do a lot of these sales, so I hope that some people will take advantage. Now, enjoy the video. I'll let you get back to it. Thanks. This one's from Mizanur. How important has networking been in your career? And can you share a memorable experience where a connection made a significant impact? That's a good one. Anybody else feel?
Very. Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, networking is why the four of us are on this panel right now. Networking is why Maven Analytics exists. It's how our leadership team came together. Yep. It was all 100% due to connections formed. I knew every single person that I hired in the early days. John and I worked together when we started our careers. Aaron and I worked together at Jason's agency a couple of years after that. Alice was hired through Chris Brule, who I found through his content on LinkedIn. All different forms of networking, but I can't overstate how critical it is just to get yourself out there and form these connections, because once you find people that you respect and trust, you can go really far together. And that's kind of what we're seeing play out right now.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'd say early in your career, it might be a little harder, but like the later you get in your career, the larger the percentage of your opportunities are going to come from your network. At least it's definitely been my experience. Let's see. So here's one from Sophia. By focusing on Excel, Power BI, and SQL and deepening my skills in these areas, am I on the right path to becoming a data analyst, or should I consider developing other skills? What do you guys think? Let's go, Alice. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the correct technical skills. And then, as Chris mentioned earlier, there are those soft skills you can use to kind of fill in all the gaps. So yeah, those sound great to me.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally agree.
One thing to quickly add to that too, it's like I think learning the foundations of Excel and SQL give you so much. Learning a tool like Power BI allows you to jump into other BI tools, right? So from like a technical tool standpoint, like I think that makes a ton of sense because you could learn those three. Excel and SQL are going to kind of be with you forever. And then if you go into a company where they're using, Tableau or Domo or Power BI or, some other BI tool, you've got that kind of background to be able to fall back on.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So you're definitely on the right track. Keep going and, you'll be in great shape. This one's from Manolo. I'm 48 and just started to transition into data. Any recommendations to transition at my age? Am I too late? I'm sure you're all gonna say yes. Turn back, right?
Yeah, I think the session later with Clay and Chris is going to be super important to tune into. Chris Mengel's a great example of a later career transition success story. He's absolutely crushing it. So definitely tune into that. You're certainly not too late. Again, it's like we've talked a lot about taking advantage of opportunities and making those shifts when they feel appropriate. And again, it sounds like you're doing exactly that, right? Make that transition, go all in, and you won't be disappointed.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Alice.
I was going to say, I'll also add, I used to teach data science boot camps, and I had people come in from 18 all the way through retirement age. And it was really interesting teaching people who are transitioning later in life because they came with so much experience from other fields, and that's invaluable. I don't think you realize that early on when you're transitioning, because if you're coming from a younger age, you often learn the technical skills first, but then if you're coming from some other experience, you do know how to work with people. You do have domain expertise somewhere, which is so important when you're doing analysis, and that's a huge strength. So I would say don't think of it as something that's bad, but it's actually a good thing. And you come with a unique perspective.
Yeah, it's awesome. Totally agree. Yeah, and like I'll echo what Aaron said. It's about 2.5 hours out. Tune in. We've got Clay and Chris, who are both career transitioners coming from a completely different background, and they are thriving today. And that I think they'll inspire you, and they'll also give you some specific pointers about what worked for them. So we hope you'll be free to join us later. This one's from Fadwa. Is mentorship a key factor to improve technical skills? If so, how do you suggest you get a mentor? And let's broaden it to just like mentor building skills and developing your career in general. How important do you guys think a mentor is? Did you guys have specific mentor-mentee relationships, and any advice to folks who want one?
Yeah, I can start off here. So I think that throughout my career, whether it's been like a formal relationship, I think you could kind of make a distinction between, like, I don't know if I've ever had like, yeah, this person has been like a formal kind of mentor. I think positioning yourself or opening yourself up to people around you, you're going to learn so much from anybody that you're willing to take coaching and advice from, right? That can come from a lot of different aspects. So I think to specifically improve technical skills, right, find somebody that is better at it than you, right? Ask them questions, right? Be a little bit vulnerable. Say like, hey, I feel like I'm deficient here, or I'd love to learn this. And then it's that kind of coaching about, potentially help on where to focus. And then it's the practical application, right? You're going to get better at a lot of those technical skills by actually using them. So finding opportunities to actually use those kind of technical skills.
Yeah, it's awesome. And anybody else have any mentor advice?
Yeah, I'll share. I would say for me, in terms of mentors in the past, my mentors have more been for soft skills, and I've found them through specific communities. So one mentor I had very early on was through my college alumni association. They had a mentorship group, and then I had a mentor who encouraged me to get into data science and get more technical. And then now I'm part of like a women's data group, and then they have a mentorship community as well. So, and that's just through Slacks. So there's just, I think they are out there if you're trying to find a mentor. It's really, when you try to find like a niche community, I think that's how you get to actually get a mentor.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I think it can be hit or miss with folks. Like, I think if you're expecting every manager you ever have to be like a really strong mentor, I think you're probably going to be disappointed. You might have some good managers who really care about you and want to develop you. And you might have some other managers who it's just, they don't care as much. So my advice on that one would be like, kind of like Alice said, look for places to get involved with other folks, potentially outside of your job, just as another potential avenue, and really kind of own your own development yourself. Don't like wait for Yoda to show up and train you. Like, you have to do, it may never come, right? So, yeah. So let's see who else we have in here. Let's see. How about this one? This one's from Mizunur again. Can you describe a particularly challenging project you worked on and what you learned from the experience that others could apply to their work?
We're all chomping at the bit to answer this one. There's a couple of ways I'm thinking about this. One, from like there's kind of two ways that like projects in my mind can be challenging. One, it's the people or the stakeholders that you're working with, right? And I've worked on projects where there was again, I was consulting at the time, and I was working for an agency, as a BI consultant for them. And the most challenging part of that whole project was actually the people management side of it, right? So it's like you're coming into a very dynamic environment where you don't quite understand the kind of interpersonal relationships with everybody that's currently existing on the team, trying to navigate that, balancing it with like the business objectives and the whole point of the project. And this particular project ended up becoming kind of combative, because there was a lot of pushing and pulling, internally within the organization. So it wasn't necessarily that it was technically challenging, but trying to navigate the relationships and all of that within the company and that environment made this project a lot more challenging than it otherwise would have been.
Yeah, similar example from my end. Less about the technique being used being challenging, more about expectations not being clearly set with particularly tough customers or clients. I think in this case, I was working with a travel booking agency, and they wanted this pretty sophisticated analysis about booking latency, how long it takes someone when they start researching to when they pull the trigger and actually book a vacation. And the problem was, it was a really interesting question, but their data was not structured in a way that we could answer it. And they wanted an answer immediately. And it was a lot of very difficult conversation around, we've got to reset expectations. We've got to go back to the drawing board. These are the things we have to do to set the stage to answer a question like that. And sometimes you have tough clients who don't want to hear that. And it's your job to be very clear about those expectations, even when it's a pretty difficult conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. Good. Lots of good lessons from these projects. Thank you guys for sharing those. Let me see if, let's go with one more here. This one's from Ayad. Do you think AI will replace entry-level data jobs? Anybody have a strong opinion?
I'll start. I'm going to say no. And it goes back to the uniquely human skills and those soft skills that we talked about earlier. I think AI will replace some components of AI or of data analyst jobs for sure, right? Like the tedious, repetitive technical skills may become less important to learn moving forward. But again, strategic thinking, business acumen, communication skills, those are going to become even more important than they are today. And those are really central parts of being a great analyst.
Yeah, it's not going to replace, but it is complementary, right? So again, if you're not learning how to use these AI tools and is part of being a entry-level analyst or a senior analyst or a manager, right? That's going to become challenging.
Yeah, I would say for a lot of these data jobs, the data sets that you're working with are just so complex and nuanced, and they're not complex in that they're technically complex, like there's a lot in there, but maybe somebody won't enter in a field correctly, or maybe somebody's been just collecting the data in a way that's unusual. That's the data science or data analyst job, to figure that out and make sure to incorporate that into their analysis. And I don't think that can be replaced with AI.
Totally agree. So 3 for 3, you guys are safe. It's still a great career path. It's like saying, will Power BI replace the entry-level analyst? No way, just another tool. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was part of our open campus event where we ran 24 sessions in front of a live audience over the course of 2 weeks. It was a ton of fun. We did all these live sessions and we opened up our entire learning platform for free. You did not need a paid account to take advantage of all the courses. So folks could learn Excel, SQL, Power BI, Tableau, Python, etc. All the stuff that you need to learn data analysis skills and take your career to the next level. If you missed it this year, keep an eye out. We'll definitely be doing this again next year, probably again in October. We would love to see you there. And the last thing that I'll leave you with, if you're looking to take your skills to the next level right now and you've been on the fence about a Maven Analytics paid plan, we are currently running our early Black Friday sale. This is the absolute best time to pay for Maven Analytics if you want to, so don't miss out. You'll have the opportunity to save up to 50% on paid plans, which is a pretty great opportunity. You can check out all the details at mavenanalytics.io. Just look for the early Black Friday banner at the top of the site. You can't miss it. Hope that we'll see some of you there as well. Thanks for watching.